poverty and shame weighed heavily on them. The practice of infanticide cannot, however, be seen as irrevocably rampant because of their dire need for male children to guard themselves against their enemies. Another aspect of the Arab's life which deserves mention is the Bedouin's deep-seated emotional attachment to his clan. Family, or perhaps tribal pride, was one of the strongest passions with him. The doctrine of unity of blood as the principle that bound the Arabs into a social unity was formed and supported by tribal pride. Their undisputed motto was, "Support your brother whether he is an oppressor or oppressed," in its literal meaning. They disregarded the Islamic amendment which states that supporting an oppressor brother implies deterring him from transgression. Avarice for leadership and keen sense of emulation often resulted in bitter tribal warfare despite descendancy from one common ancestor. In this regard, the continued bloody conflicts of Aus and Khazraj, Abs and Dihabyan, Bakr and Taglib, etc. are striking examples. Intertribal relationships were fragile and weak due to continual intertribal wars of attrition. Deep devotion to religious superstitions and some customs held in veneration, however, used to curb their impetuous tendency to quench their thirst for blood. In other cases, there were the motives of, and respect for, alliance, loyalty, and dependency which could successfully bring about a spirit of rapport and abort groundless bases of dispute. A time-honored custom of suspending hostilities during the prohibited months Muharram, Rajab, Dhul-Qa'dah, and Dhul-Hijjah functioned favorably and provided an opportunity for them to earn their living and coexist in peace. We may sum up the social situation in Arabia by saying that the Arabs of the pre-Islamic period were groping about in the dark and ignorance, entangled in a mesh of superstitions paralyzing their mind and driving them to lead an animal-like life. The woman was a marketable commodity and regarded as a piece of inanimate property. Intertribal relationships were fragile. Avarice for wealth and involvement in feudal wars were the main objectives that governed their chiefs' self-centered policies. The economic situation, 29. MSA Neu. The economic situation ran in line with the social atmosphere. The Arabian ways of living would illustrate this phenomenon quite clearly. Trade was the most common means of providing their needs of life. The trade journeys could not be fulfilled unless security of caravan routes and intertribal peaceful coexistence were provided. 2. Imperative exigencies unfortunately lacking in Arabia except during the prohibited months within which the Arabs held their assemblies of yukas, Dil-Majas, Miyana, and others. Industry was alien to the Arabian psychology. Most of available industries of knitting and tannage in Arabia were done by people coming from Yemen, Hira and the borders of Syria. Inside Arabia there was some sort of farming and stock breeding. Almost all the Arabian women worked in yarn spinning, but even this practice was continually threatened by wars. On the whole, poverty, hunger and insufficient clothing were the prevailing features in Arabia economically. Ethics. We cannot deny that the pre-Islam Arabs had such a large bulk of evils. Admittedly, vices and evils, utterly rejected by reason, were rampant amongst the pre-Islam Arabs, but this could never screen off the surprise-provoking existence of highly praiseworthy virtues, of which we could adduce the following. 1. Hospitality. They used to emulate one another at hospitality and take utmost pride in it. Almost half of their poetry heritage was dedicated to the merits and nobility attached to entertaining one's guest. They were generous and hospitable on the point of fault. They would sacrifice their private sustenance to a cold or hungry guest. They would not hesitate to incur heavy blood money and relevant burdens just to stop bloodshed, and consequently, merit praise and eulogy. In the context of hospitality, there springs up their common habits of drinking wine, which was regarded as a channel branching out of generosity and showing hospitality. Wine drinking was a genuine source of pride for the Arabs of the pre-Islamic period. The great poets of that era never forgot to include their suspending odes the most ornate lines pregnant with boasting and praise of drinking orgies. Even the word grapes in Arabic is identical to generosity in both pronunciation and spelling. Gambling was also another practice of theirs closely associated with generosity, since the proceeds would always go to charity. Even the noble core does not play down the benefits that derive from wine drinking and gambling, but also says, and the sin of them is greater than their benefit. Al-Quran 2-219, 2. Keeping a covenant. For the Arab, to make a promise was to run into debt. He would never grudge the death of his children or destruction of his household just to uphold the deep-rooted tradition of covenant keeping. The Literature of that period is rich in stories highlighting this merit. 3. Sense of honor and repudiation of injustice. This attribute stemmed mainly from excess courage, keen sense of self-esteem and impetuosity. The Arab was always in revolt against the least allusion to humiliation or 29. Msa slackness. He would never hesitate to sacrifice himself to maintain his ever-alert sense of self-respect. 4. Firm will and determination. An Arab would never desist an avenue conducive to an object of pride or a standing of honor, even if it were at the expense of his life. 5. Forbearance, perseverance and mildness. The Arab regarded these traits with great admiration. No wonder his impetuosity and courage-based life was sadly wanting in them. 6. Pure and simple Bedouin life, still untarnished with accessories of deceptive urban appearances, was a driving reason to his nature of truthfulness and honesty, and detachment from intrigue and treachery. Such priceless ethics coupled with a favorable geographical position of Arabia were, in fact, the factors that lay behind selecting the Arabs to undertake the burden of communicating the message of Islam and leading mankind down a new course of life. In this regard, these ethics per se, though detrimental in some areas, and in need of rectification in certain aspects, were greatly invaluable to the ultimate welfare of the human community, and Islam has did it completely. The most priceless ethics, next to covenant-keeping, were no doubt their sense of self-esteem and strong determination, two human traits indispensable in combating evil and eliminating moral corruption on the one hand, and establishing a good and justice-orientated society, on the other. Actually, the life of the Arabs in the pre-Islamic period was rich in other countless virtues we do not need to enumerate for the time being. 31. The lineage and family of Muhammad, pbuh, msa. With respect to the lineage of Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, there are three versions. The first was authenticated by biographers and genealogists and states that Muhammad's genealogy has been traced to Adnan. The second is subject to controversies and doubt, and traces his lineage beyond Adnan back to Abraham. The third version, with some parts definitely incorrect, traces his lineage beyond Abraham back to Adam, AWS. After this rapid review, now ample details are believed to be necessary. The first part, Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Abdul Muttalib, who was called Sheba bin Hashim, named Amr bin Abd Munaf, called al-Mughira bin Qusay, also called Zayd bin Kilab bin Murrah bin Ka'b bin Lo'i bin Ghalib bin Far, who was called Quraysh and whose tribe was called after him, bin Malik bin Nader, so-called Qais bin Kanana bin Kuzayman bin Mudrika, who was called Amir bin Elias bin Mudar bin Nazar bin Ma'ad bin Adnan. Ibn Hisham 1/1, 2, Dhulkifl al-Athar, p. 5-6. Rahmat ul-Lil Alamin 2/11-14, 52. The second part, Adnan bin Ad bin Humaysi bin Salaman bin Oz bin Buz bin Kamul bin Obai bin Awam bin Nasheed bin Haza bin Bildaz bin Yadlaf bin Tabik bin Jahim bin Nahish bin Makai bin Aid bin Abkar bin Ubaid bin Ad-Da'a bin Hamdan bin Sanbar bin Yathrabi bin Yazan bin Yalhan bin Arawi bin Aid bin Deshan bin Isar bin Afnad bin Iham bin Muksar bin Nahith bin Zara bin Sami bin Mazi bin Ada bin Aram bin Qaidar bin Ishmael son of Abraham, AWS. Rahmat ul-Lil Alamin 2/14-17. The third part, beyond Abraham, AWS, Ibn Tari Azar bin Nahor bin Saru bin Ra'u bin Falik bin Abir bin Shalik bin Arfashad bin Sam bin Noah, AWS, bin Lamik bin Mutwashlik bin Aknik, who was said to be Prophet Idris Enoch, AWS, bin Yared bin Malil bin Kainan bin Anusha bin Sheath bin Adam, AWS. Ibn Hisham 1/2-4, Rahmat ul-Lil Alamin 2/18, Khulasad as CRP.6, the prophetic family. The family of Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, is called the Hashemite family after his grandfather Hashim bin Abd Munaf. Let us now speak a little about Hashim and his descendants. 1. Hashim. As we have previously mentioned, he was the one responsible for giving food and water to the pilgrims. This had been his charge when the sons of Abd Munaf and those of Abd ad-Dar compromised on dividing the charges between them. Hashim was wealthy and honest. He was the first to offer the pilgrims sopped bread in broth. His first name was Amr, but he was called Hashim because he had been in the practice of crumbling bread for the pilgrims. He was also the first man who started Quraysh's 2 journeys of summer and winter. It was reported that he went to Syria as a merchant. In Madinah, he married Salma, the daughter of Amr from Bani Adi bin Najjar. He spent some time with her in Madinah, then he left for Syria again, while she was pregnant. He died in Gaza in Palestine in 497 AD. Later, his wife gave birth to Abdul Muttalib and named him Sheba for the white hair. In 32 Msa Niu. His head, Ibn Hisham 137th, Ramad ul Alamin 126th, 224ths, and brought him up in her father's house in Madinah. None of his family in Makkah learned of his birth. Hashim had 4 sons, Asad, Abu Saifi, Nadla and Abdul Muttalib, and 5 daughters Ash-Shifa, Khalida, Daifa, Ruqya and Jannah. Ibn Hisham 107th, 2. Abdul Muttalib. We have already known that after the death of Hashim, the charge of pilgrims' food and water went to his brother al-Muttalib bin Abd Munaf, who was honest, generous and trustworthy. When Abdul Muttalib reached the age of boyhood, his uncle al-Muttalib heard of him and went to Madinah to fetch him. When he saw him, tears filled his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He embraced him and took him on his camel. The boy, however, abstained from going with him to Makkah until he took his mother's consent. Al-Muttalib asked her to send the boy with him to Makkah, but she refused. He managed to convince her, saying, "Your son is going to Makkah to restore his father's authority, and to live in the vicinity of the sacred house." There in Makkah, people wondered at seeing Abdul Muttalib, and they considered him the slave of Muttalib. Al-Muttalib said, "He is my nephew, the son of my brother Hashim." The boy was brought up in al-Muttalib's house, but later on, al-Muttalib died in Bardman in Yemen, so Abdul Muttalib took over and managed to maintain his people's prestige and outdo his grandfathers in his honorable behavior, which gained him Makkah's deep love and high esteem. Ibn Hisham 137,138. When al-Muttalib died, Nawfal usurped Abdul Muttalib of his charges, so the latter asked for help from Quraysh, but they abstained from extending any sort of support to either of them. Consequently, he wrote to his uncles of Bani Najjar, his mother's brothers, to come to his aid. His uncle, Abu Sa'd bin Adi, his mother's brother, marched to Makkah at the head of 80 horsemen, and camped in Abta in Makkah. Abdul Muttalib received the men and invited them to go to his house, but Abu Sa'd said, "Not before I meet Nawfal." He found Nawfal sitting with some old men of Quraysh in the shade of Al-Kaaba. Abu Sa'd drew his sword and said, "I swear by all, that if you don't restore to my nephew what you have taken, I will kill you with this sword." Nawfal was thus forced to give up what he had usurped, and the notables of Quraysh were made to witness to his words. Abu Sa'd then went to Abdul Muttalib's house, where he stayed for 3 nights, made Umrah and left back for Madinah. Later on, Nawfal entered into alliance with Bani Abd Shams bin Abd Munaf against Bani Hashim. When Khuza'ah, a tribe, saw Bani and Najjar's support to Abdul Muttalib, they said, "He is our son as he is yours. We have more reasons to support him than you." Abd Munaf's mother was one of them. They went into a Nadwa house and entered into alliance with Bani Hashim against Bani Abd Shams and Nawfal. It was an alliance that was later to constitute the main reason for the conquest of Makkah. Abdul Muttalib witnessed 2 important events in his lifetime, namely digging Zamzam well and the elephant raid. Mukhtasar Sirat ar Rasul, p.41, 42. Ibn Hisham, 142-147. In brief, Abdul Muttalib received an order in his dream to dig Zamzam well in a particular place. He did that and found the things that Jurhum men had buried therein when they were forced to evacuate Makkah. He found the swords, armors and the 2 deer of gold. The gate of Al-Kaaba was stamped from the gold swords and the 2 deer, and then the tradition of providing Zamzam water to pilgrims was established. 33. Msa Niu. When the well of Zamzam gushed water forth, Quraysh made a claim to partnership in the enterprise, but Abdul Muttalib refused their demands on grounds that all had singled only him out for this honorable job. To settle the dispute, they agreed to consult Bani Sa'd's diviner. On their way, all showed them his signs that confirmed Abdul Muttalib's prerogative as regards the sacred spring. Only then did Abdul Muttalib make a solemn vow to sacrifice one of his adult children to Al-Kaaba if he had 10. The second event was that of Abraha as Saba al-Habashi, the Abyssinian, Ethiopian viceroy in Yemen. He had seen that the Arabs made their pilgrimage to Al-Kaaba, so he built a large church in Sana'a in order to attract the Arab pilgrims to it, to the exclusion of Makkah. A man from Kanana tribe understood this move, therefore he entered the church stealthily at night and besmeared its front wall with excrement. When Abraha knew of that, he got very angry and led a great army of 60,000 warriors to demolish Al-Kaaba. He chose the biggest elephant for himself. His army included 9 or 13 elephants. He continued marching until he reached a place called Al-Magmas. There, he mobilized his army, prepared his elephants and got ready to enter Makkah. When he reached Muhassar Valley, between Muzdalifah and Mina, the elephant knelt down and refused to go forward. Whenever they directed it northwards, southwards or eastwards, the elephant moved quickly, but when directed westwards towards Al-Kaaba, it knelt down. Meanwhile, all loosed upon them birds in flights, hurling against them stones of baked clay and made them like green blades devoured. These birds were very much like swallows and sparrows, each carrying 3 stones, 1 in its beak and 2 in its claws. The stones hit Abraha's men and cut their limbs and killed them. A large number of Abraha's soldiers were killed in this way and the others fled at random and died everywhere. Abraha himself had an infection that had his fingertips amputated. When he reached Sana'a, he was in a miserable state and died soon after. The Qurayshites on their part had fled for their lives to the hillocks and mountaintops. When the enemy had been thus routed, they returned home safely. Ibn Hisham 143-56. Tafhimul Quran 6 460-469. The event of the elephant took place in the month of Al-Muharram, 50 or 55 days before the birth of Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, which corresponded to late February or early March 571 AD. It was a gift from Allah to his prophet and his family. It could actually be regarded as a divine, auspicious precursor of the light to come and accompany the advent of the prophet and his family. By contrast, Jerusalem had suffered under the yoke of the atrocities of Allah's enemies. Here we can recall Bukhtanasar in BC 587, and the Romans in 70 AD. Al-Kaaba, by divine grace, never came under the hold of the Christians, the Muslims of that time, although Makkah was populated by polytheists. News of the elephant event reached the most distant corners of the then civilized world. Abyssinia, Ethiopia maintained strong ties with the Romans, while the Persians on the other hand, were on the vigil with respect to any strategic changes that were looming on the socio-political horizon, and soon came to occupy Yemen. Incidentally, the Roman and Persian empires stood 34 MSA Neu for the powerful civilized world at that time. The elephant raid event riveted the world's attention to the sacredness of Allah's house and showed that this house had been chosen by Allah for its holiness. It followed then if any of its people claimed prophethood, it would be congruous with the outcome of the elephant event and would provide a justifiable explanation for the ulterior divine wisdom that lay behind backing polytheists against Christians in a manner that transcended the cause and effect formula. Abdul Muttalib had 10 sons: Al-Harith, Az-Zubair, Abu Talib, Abdullah, Hamza, Abu Lahab, Gadak, Maqwam, Safar and Al-Abbas. He also had 6 daughters, who were al-Hakim, the only white one, Bara, Atika, Safiya, Arwa and Umayma. Ramad ul-Lil Alamin 256-66, Talki Fahum, al-Athar, p. 8-9-3. Abdullah, the father of Prophet Muhammad, pbuh. His mother was Fatima, daughter of Amr bin Ayyub bin Imran bin Mazam bin Yaqda bin Murrah. Abdullah was the smartest of Abdul Muttalib's sons, the chastest and the most loved. He was also the son whom the divination arrows pointed at to be slaughtered as a sacrifice to Al-Kaaba. When Abdul Muttalib had 10 sons, and they reached maturity, he divulged to them his secret vow in which they silently and obediently acquiesced. Their names were written on divination arrows and given to the guardian of their most beloved goddess, Hubal. The arrows were shuffled and drawn. An arrow showed that it was Abdullah to be sacrificed. Abdul Muttalib then took the boy to Al-Kaaba with a razor to slaughter the boy. Quraysh, his uncles from Mazam tribe and his brother Abu Talib, however, tried to dissuade him from consummating his purpose. He then sought their advice as regards his vow. They suggested that he summon a she-diviner to judge whereabout. She ordered that the divination arrows should be drawn with respect to Abdullah as well as 10 camels. She added that drawing the lots should be repeated with 10 more camels every time the arrow showed Abdullah. The operation was thus repeated until the number of the camels amounted to 100. At this point the arrow showed the camels, consequently they were all slaughtered to the satisfaction of Hubal instead of his son. The slaughtered camels were left for anyone to eat from, human or animal. This incident produced a change in the amount of blood money usually accepted in Arabia. It had been 10 camels, but after this event it was increased to 100. Islam, later on, approved of this. Another thing, closely relevant to the above issue goes to the effect that the Prophet, pbuh, once said, "I am the offspring of the slaughtered too," meaning Ishmael and Abdullah. Ibn Hisham 151-155. Rahmat ul Alamin 289, 90. Abdul Muttalib chose Amina, daughter of Wahab bin Abd Munaf bin Zara bin Kilab, as a wife for his son, Abdullah. She thus, in the light of this ancestral lineage, stood eminent in respect of nobility of position and descent. Her father was the chief of Bani Zara to whom great honor was attributed. They were married in Makkah, and soon after, Abdullah was sent by his father to buy dates in Madinah where he died. In another version, Abdullah went to Syria on a trade journey and died in Madinah on his way back. He was buried, 35, Msa Niu, in the house of an-Nabiya al-Ju'i. He was 25 years old when he died. Most historians state that his death was 2 months before the birth of Muhammad, pbuh. Some others said that his death was 2 months after the Prophet's birth. When Amina was informed of her husband's death, she celebrated his memory in a most heart-touching elegy. Ibn Hisham 156, 158, Fiqh as-Sirah p.45, Abdullah left very little wealth, 5 camels, a small number of goats, a servant, called Baraka, Ayman, who would later serve as the Prophet's nursemaid. Muslim 296, Talqi Fahum al-Athar p.4, Mukhtasar Sirat ar. Rasul page 12, 36. Muhammad's birth and 40 years prior to prophethood. Msa Niu. His birth. Muhammad, pbuh, the master of prophets, was born in Bani Hashim Lane in Makkah, on Monday morning, the 9th of Rabi al-Awwal, the same year of the elephant event, and 40 years of the reign of Kisra Khosru Nushirwan, i.e. the 20th or 22nd of April, 571 AD, according to the scholar Muhammad Sulayman al-Mansurpuri and the astrologer Mam Pasha, Muhadarat Tariq al-Umam al-Islamiyya 162nd, Rahmat ul Alamin 138, 39, Ibn Sa'd reported that Muhammad's mother said, "When he was born, there was a light that issued out of my pudendum and lit the palaces of Syria." Ahmad reported, on the authority of Arba bin Sariya, something similar to this. Mukhtasar Sirat, Rasul, p.12, Tabakat ibn Sa'd 163rd, it was but controversially reported that significant precursors accompanied his birth. 14 galleries of Kisra's palace cracked and rolled down, the Magian's sacred fire died down, and some churches on Lake Sawa sank down and collapsed. Reported by al-Bayhaqi, but al-Ghazali didn't approve it. See Fiqh as-Sirah p.46. His mother immediately sent someone to inform his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, of the happy event. Happily he came to her, carried him to al-Kaaba, prayed to Allah, and thanked him. Abdul Muttalib called the baby Muhammad, a name not then common among the Arabs. He circumcised him on his 7th day, as was the custom of the Arabs. Ibn Hisham 159,160th, Zad al-Ma'ad 118th, Muhadarat. Tariq al-Umam al-Islamiyya 162nd. The first woman who suckled him after his mother was Twaybah, the concubine of Abu Lahab, with her son, Masro. She had suckled Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, before and later Abu Salama bin Abd al-Asad al-Makhzumi. Talqi Farum al-Athar p.4, Mukhtasar Sirat Rasul p.13, Babyhood. It was the general custom of the Arabs living in towns to send their children away to Bedouin wet nurses so that they might grow up in the free and healthy surroundings of the desert, whereby they would develop a robust frame and acquire the pure speech and manners of the Bedouin, who were noted both for chastity of their language and for being free from those vices which usually develop in sedentary societies. The Prophet, pbuh, was later entrusted to Halima bint Abi Du'aib from Bani Sa'd bin Bakr. Her husband was al-Harith bin Abdul Uzza, called Abi Kabsha, from the same tribe. Muhammad, pbuh, had several foster brothers and sisters, Abdullah bin al-Harith, Anisa bint al-Harith, Hudafa or Judama bint al-Harith known as Ash, Shema, and she used to nurse the Prophet, pbuh, and Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith, bin Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's cousin, Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's 37. Msa Niu uncle, was suckled by the same two wet nurses, Twiyeba and Halima as Sadia, who suckled the Prophet, pbuh. Zad al-Ma'ad 119th. Traditions delightfully relate how Halima and the whole of her household were favored by successive strokes of good fortune while the baby Muhammad, pbuh, lived under her care. Ibn Ishaq states that Halima narrated that she along with her husband and a suckling babe, set out from her village in the company of some women of her clan in quest of children to suckle. She said, "It was a year of drought and famine and we had nothing to eat. I rode on a brown she-ass. We also had with us an old she-camel. By all, we could not get even a drop of milk. We could not have a wink of sleep during the night for the child kept crying on account of hunger. There was not enough milk in my breast and even the she-camel had nothing to feed him. We used to constantly pray for rain and immediate relief. At length we reached Makkah looking for children to suckle. Not even a single woman amongst us accepted the messenger of all? Pbuh offered to her. As soon as they were told that he was an orphan, they refused him. We had fixed our eyes on the reward that we would get from the child's father. An orphan? What are his grandfather and mother likely to do? So we spurned him because of that. Every woman who came with me got a suckling, and when we were about to depart, I said to my husband, by all, I do not like to go back along with the other women without any baby. I should go to that orphan and I must take him. He said, there is no harm in doing so and perhaps all might bless us through him. So I went and took him because there was simply no other alternative left for me but to take him. When I lifted him in my arms and returned to my place, I put him on my breast, and to my great surprise, I found enough milk in it. He drank to his heart's content, and so did his foster brother, and then both of them went to sleep. Although my baby had not been able to sleep the previous night, my husband then went to the she-camel to milk it, and, to his astonishment, he found plenty of milk in it. He milked it and we drank to our fill, and enjoyed a sound sleep during the night. The next morning, my husband said, by all, Halima, you must understand that you have been able to get a blessed child. And I replied, by the grace of all, I hope so. The tradition is explicit on the point that Halima's return journey and her subsequent life, as long as the Prophet, pbuh, stayed with her, was encircled with a halo of good fortune. The donkey that she rode when she came to Makkah was lean and almost foundered. It recovered speed much to the amazement of Halima's fellow travelers. By the time they reached the encampments in the country of the clan of Saad, they found the scales of fortune turned in their favor. The barren land sprouted forth luxuriant grass, and beasts came back to them satisfied and full of milk. Muhammad, pbuh, stayed with Halima for 2 years until he was weaned. As Halima said, we then took him back to his mother, requesting her earnestly to have him stay with us and benefit by the good fortune and blessings he had brought us. We persisted in our request, which we substantiated by our anxiety over the child catching a certain infection peculiar to Makkah. Ibn Hisham 162-164. At last, we were granted our wish, and the Prophet, pbuh, stayed with us until he was 4 or 5 years of age, when, as related by Anas in Sahih Muslim, Gabriel came down and ripped his chest open and took out the heart. He then extracted a blood clot out of it and said, that 38 Msa Niu was the part of Satan in thee. And then he washed it with the water of Zamzam in a gold basin. After that the heart was joined together and restored to its place. The boys and playmates came running to his mother, i.e. his nurse, and said, verily, Muhammad, pbuh, has been murdered. They all rushed towards him and found him all right, only his face was white. Muslim 192nd, back to his passionate mother. After this event, Halima was worried about the boy and returned him to his mother, with whom he stayed until he was 6. Talki Farum al-Athar p.7, Ibn Hisham 168. In respect of the memory of her late husband, Amina decided to visit his grave in Yathrib, Madinah. She set out to cover a journey of 500 kilometers with her orphan boy, woman servant Ayman, and her father-in-law, Abdul Muttalib. She spent a month there and then took her way back to Makkah. On the way, She had a severe illness and died in Abwa on the road between Makkah and Madinah. Ibn Hisham, 168, Talqi Furum al-Athar p.7, to his compassionate grandfather. Abdul Muttalib brought the boy to Makkah. He had warm passions towards the boy, his orphan grandson, whose recent disaster, his mother's death, added more to the pains of the past. Abdul Muttalib was more passionate with his grandson than with his own children. He never left the boy a prey to loneliness, but always preferred him to his own kids. Ibn Hisham reported, a mattress was put in the shade of Al-Kaaba for Abdul Muttalib. His children used to sit around that mattress in honor to their father, but Muhammad, pbuh, used to sit on it. His uncles would take him back, but if Abdul Muttalib was present, he would say, leave my grandson. I swear by all, that this boy will hold a significant position. He used to seat the boy on his mattress, pat his back, and was always pleased with what the boy did. Ibn Hisham, 168, when Muhammad, pbuh, was 8 years, 2 months and 10 days old, his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, passed away in Makkah. The charge of the Prophet, pbuh, was now passed on to his uncle Abu Talib, who was the brother of the Prophet's father. Abu Talib took the charge of his nephew in the best way. He put him with his children and preferred him to them. He singled the boy out with great respect and high esteem. Abu Talib remained for 40 years cherishing his nephew and extending all possible protection and support to him. His relations with the others were determined in the light of the treatment they showed to the Prophet, pbuh. Ibn Asakir reported on the authority of Jalhama bin Arfuda, who said, I came to Makkah when it was a rainless year, so Quraysh said, O Abu Talib, the valley has become leafless and the children hungry, let us go and pray for rainfall. Abu Talib went to Al-Kaaba with a young boy who was as beautiful as the sun, and a black cloud was over his head. Abu Talib and the boy stood by the wall of Al-Kaaba and prayed for rain. Immediately clouds from all directions gathered and rain fell heavily. 39. Msa Niu, and caused the flow of springs and growth of plants in the town and the country. Muqtasar Sirat Rasul p.15, 16, Bahira, the monk. When the messenger of all, pbuh, was 12 years old, he went with his uncle, Abu Talib, on a business journey to Syria. When they reached Bushra, which was a part of Syria, in the vicinity of Harun under the Roman domain, they met a monk, called Bahira. His real name was George, who showed great kindness, and entertained them lavishly. He had never been in the habit of receiving or entertaining them before. He readily enough recognized the Prophet, pbuh, and said, while taking his hand, this is the master of all humans. All will send him with a message which will be a mercy to all beings. Abu Talib asked, how do you know that? He replied, when you appeared from the direction of Aqaba, all stones and trees prostrated themselves, which they never do except for a prophet. I can recognize him also by the seal of prophethood which is below his shoulder, like an apple. We have got to learn this from our books. He also asked Abu Talib to send the boy back to Makkah and not to take him to Syria for fear of the Jews. Abu Talib obeyed and sent him back to Makkah with some of his men servants. Ibn Hisham, 180th-183, Zad al-Ma'ad 117th, the sacrilegious wars. Muhammad, pbuh, was hardly 15 when the sacrilegious wars, which continued with varying fortunes and considerable loss of human life for a number of years, broke out between Quraysh and Banu Kanana on the one side and Qais Alan tribe on the other. It was thus called because the inviolables were made violable, the prohibited months being included. Harb bin Umayyah, on account of his outstanding position and honorable descent, used to be the leader of Quraysh and their allies. In one of those battles, the Prophet, pbuh, attended on his uncles but did not raise arms against their opponents. His efforts were confined to picking up the arrows of the enemy as they fell, and handing them over to his uncles. Ibn Hisham 184th-187, Kab Jazirat al-Arab p.260, al-Fudul Confederacy. At the conclusion of these wars, when peace was restored, people felt the need for forming confederacy at Makkah for suppressing violence and injustice, and vindicating the rights of the weak and the destitute. Representatives of Banu Hashim, Banu al-Muttalib, Asad bin Abd al-Uzza, Zara bin Kilab and Taim bin Murrah were called to meet in the habitation of an honorable elderly man called Abdullah bin Jadon at Tamimi to enter into a confederacy that would provide for the above-mentioned items. The messenger of all, pbuh, shortly after he had been honored with the ministry of prophethood, witnessed this league and commented on it with very positive words. I witnessed a confederacy in the house of Abdullah bin Jadon. It was more appealing to me than herds of cattle. Even now in the period of Islam I would respond positively to attending such a meeting if I were invited. Ibn Hisham 113,135. In fact, the spirit of this confederacy and the course of deliberations therein marked a complete departure from the pre-Islamic tribal pride. The story that led to its 40. Msa Niu convention says that a man from Zubayd clan came as a merchant to Makkah where he sold some commodities to Al-As bin Wa'il as-Sami. The latter by hook or by crook tried to evade paying for the goods. The salesman sought help from the different clans in Quraysh, but they paid no heed to his earnest pleas. He then resorted to a mountain top and began, at the top of his voice, to recite verses of complaint giving account of the injustices he sustained. As Zubair bin Abdul Muttalib heard of him and made inquiries into the matter. Consequently, the parties to the aforesaid confederacy convened their meeting and managed to force Az-Zubaydi's money out of Al-As bin Wa'il. Mukhtasar Sirat Rasul, p.30, 31. Muhammad's early job. Muhammad, pbuh, had no particular job at his early youth, but it was reported that he worked as a shepherd for Bani Sa'd and in Makkah. At the age of 25, he went to Syria as a merchant for Khadija. Ibn Ishaq reported that Khadija, daughter of Khuwaylid, was a businesswoman of great honor and fortune. She used to employ men to do her business for a certain percentage of the profits. Quraysh people were mostly tradespeople, so when Khadija was informed of Muhammad, pbuh, his truthful words, great honesty and kind manners, she sent for him. She offered him money to go to Syria and do her business, and she would give him a higher rate than the others. She would also send her hireling, Maysara, with him. He agreed, and went with her servant to Syria for trade. Ibn Hisham 187,188. His marriage to Khadija. When he returned to Makkah, Khadija noticed, in her money, more profits and blessings than she used to. Her hireling also told her of Muhammad's good manners, honesty, deep thought, sincerity and faith. She realized that she homed at her target. Many prominent men had asked for her hand in marriage, but she always spurned their advances. She disclosed her wish to her friend Nafisa, daughter of Maniya, who immediately went to Muhammad, pbuh, and broke the good news to him. He agreed and requested his uncles to go to Khadija's uncle and talk on this issue. Subsequently, they were married. The marriage contract was witnessed by Bani Hashim and the heads of Mudar. This took place after the Prophet's return from Syria. He gave her 20 camels as dowry. She was, then, 40 years old and was considered as the best woman of her folk in lineage, fortune and wisdom. She was the first woman whom the Messenger of all, pbuh, married. He did not get married to any other until she had died. Ibn Hisham 189th. Fiqh as-Sirah p.59, Talqi. Fahum al-Athar p.7, Khadija bore all his children, except Ibrahim, Al-Qasim, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Fatima and Abdullah, who was called Tayyib and Tahir. All his sons died in their childhood and all the daughters except Fatima died during his lifetime. Fatima died 6 months after his death. All his daughters witnessed Islam, embraced it, and emigrated to Madinah. Ibn Hisham 190,191. Fath al-Bari 7,507. Rebuilding al-Kaaba and the arbitration issue. When the Messenger of all, pbuh, was 35, Quraysh started rebuilding al-Kaaba. That was because it was a low building of white stones no more than 6.30 meters high, from the days of Ishmael. It was also roofless and that gave the thieves 41 Msa Niu easy access to its treasures inside. It was also exposed to the wearing factors of nature, because it was built a long time ago, that weakened and cracked its walls. 5 years before prophethood, there was a great flood in Makkah that swept towards al-Kaaba and almost demolished it. Quraysh was obliged to rebuild it to safeguard its holiness and position. The chiefs of Quraysh decided to use only licit money in rebuilding al-Kaaba, so all money that derived from harlotry, usury or unjust practices was excluded. They were, at first, too odd to knock down the wall, but al-Walid bin al-Mughira al-Mukhzumi started the work. Seeing that no harm had happened to him, the others participated in demolishing the walls until they reached the basis laid by Abraham. When they started rebuilding its walls, they divided the work among the tribes. Each tribe was responsible for rebuilding a part of it. The tribes collected stones and started work. The man who laid the stones was a Roman mason called Bakwam. The work went on in harmony till the time came to put the sacred black stone in its proper place. Then strife broke out among the chiefs, and lasted for 4 or 5 days, each contesting for the honor of placing the stone in its position. Daggers were on the point of being drawn and great bloodshed seemed imminent. Luckily, the oldest among the chiefs, Abu Umayyah bin Mughira al-Makhzumi, made a proposal which was accepted by all. He said, "Let him who enters the sanctuary first of all decide on the point." It was then all's will that the messenger of all, pbuh, should be the first to enter the mosque. On seeing him, all the people on the scene cried with one voice, "Al-Amin the Trustworthy has come. We are content to abide by his decision." Calm and self-possessed, Muhammad, pbuh, received the commission and at once resolved upon an expedient, which was to conciliate them all. He asked for a mantle which he spread on the ground and placed the stone in its center. He then asked the representatives of the different clans among them to lift the stone all together. When it had reached the proper place, Muhammad, pbuh, laid it in the proper position with his own hands. This is how a very tense situation was eased and a grave danger averted by the wisdom of the Prophet, pbuh. Quraysh ran short of the licit money they collected, so they eliminated 6 yards area on the northern side of Al-Kaaba, which is called Al-Hayr or Al-Hadim. They raised its door 2 meters from the level ground to let in only the people whom they desired. When the structure was 15 yards high, they erected the roof which rested on 6 columns. When the building of Al-Kaaba had finished, it assumed a square form 15 meters high. The side with the black stone and the one opposite were 10 meters long each. The black stone was 1.50 meters from the circumambulation level ground. The 2 other sides were 12 meters long each. The door was 2 meters high from the level ground. A building structure of 0.25 meters high and 0.30 meters wide on the average surrounded Al-Kaaba. It was called Ash-Shadarwan, originally an integral part of the sacred sanctuary, but Quraysh left it out. Bukhari 1-215, Fiqh as-Sirah, p.62-63, Ibn Hisham 2-192-197, a rapid review of Muhammad's biography before commissioning of the prophethood. Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, was, in his youth, a combination of the best social attributes. He was an exemplary man of weighty mind and faultless insight. He was favored with intelligence, originality of thought and accurate choice of the means, leading to accurate goals. His long silence helped favorably in his habit of 42 Msa Niu, meditation and deep investigation into the truth. His vivid mind and pure nature were helpfully instrumental in assimilating and comprehending ways of life and people, individual and community-wise. He shunned superstitious practices but took an active part in constructive and useful dealings, otherwise, he would have recourse to his self-consecrated solitude. He kept himself aloof from drinking wine, eating meat slaughtered on stone altars, or attending idolatrous festivals. He held the idols in extreme aversion and most abhorrence. He could never tolerate someone swearing by Al-Lat and Al-Uzza. Allah's providence, no doubts, detached him from all abominable or evil practices. Even when he tried to obey his instinct to enjoy some life pleasures or follow some irrespectable traditions, Allah's providence intervened to curb any lapse in this course. Ibn al-Athir reported Muhammad, pbuh, as saying, "I have never tried to do what my people do except for 2 times. Every time Allah intervened and checked me from doing so, and I never did that again. Once I told my fellow shepherd to take care of my sheep when we were in the upper part of Makkah. I wanted to go down to Makkah and entertain myself as the young men did. I went down to the first house of Makkah where I heard music. I entered and asked, 'What is this?' Someone answered, 'It is a wedding party.' I sat down and listened, but soon went into deep sleep. I was awakened by the heat of the sun. I went back to my fellow shepherd and told him of what had happened to me. I have never tried it again." Al-Bukhari reported on the authority of Heber bin Abdullah that he said, while the people were rebuilding Al-Kaaba, the Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, went with Abbas to carry some stones. Abbas said, "Put your loincloth round your neck to protect you from the stones." As he did that, the prophet, pbuh, fell to the ground and his eyes turned skyward. Later on he woke up and shouted, "My loincloth! My loincloth!" He wrapped himself in his loincloth. In another report, his loins were never seen afterwards. Bukhari chapter. The building of Al-Kaaba, 1540th. The authorities agree in ascribing to the youth of Muhammad, pbuh, modesty of deportment, virtuous behavior and graceful manners. He proved himself to be the ideal of manhood, and to possess a spotless character. He was the most obliging to his compatriots, the most honest in his talk and the mildest in temper. He was the most gentle-hearted, chaste, hospitable and always impressed people by his piety, inspiring countenance. He was the most truthful and the best to keep covenant. His fellow citizens, by common consent, gave him the title of Al-Amin, trustworthy. The mother of believers, Khadijah, once said, "He unites uterine relations, he helps the poor and the needy, he entertains the guests and endures hardships in the path of truthfulness." Bukhari 1/3, 43. In the shade of the message and prophethood, Msa Niu. When Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, was nearly 40, he had been wont to pass long hours in retirement meditating and speculating over all aspects of creation around him. This meditative temperament helped to widen the mental gap between him and his compatriots. He used to provide himself with sa'ik barley porridge and water, and then directly head for the hills and ravines in the neighborhood of Makkah. One of these in particular was his favorite resort, a cave named Hira, in the Mount An-Nur. It was only 2 miles from Makkah, a small cave 4 yards long and 1.75 yard wide. He would always go there and invite wayfarers to share him his modest provision. He used to devote most of his time, and Ramadan in particular, to worship and meditation on the universe around him. His heart was restless about the moral evils and idolatry that were rampant among his people. He was as yet helpless, because no definite course or specific approach had been available for him to follow and rectify the ill practices around him. This solitude attended with this sort of contemplative approach must be understood in its divine perspective. It was a preliminary stage to the period of grave responsibilities that he was to shoulder very soon. Rahmat al-Lil Alamin 147th, Ibn Hisham 1-235,236. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29-166. Privacy and detachment from the impurities of life were 2 indispensable prerequisites for the Prophet's soul to come into close communion with the unseen power that lies behind all aspects of existence in this infinite universe. It was a rich period of privacy which lasted for 3 years and ushered in a new era of indissoluble contact with that power. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29-166,167. Interruption of revelation. Ibn Sa'd reported on the authority of Ibn Abbas that the revelation paused for a few days. Fath al-Bari 127, 12/360. After careful study, this seems to be the most possible. To say that it lasted for 3.5 years, as some scholars allege, is not correct, but here there is no room to go into more details. Meanwhile, the Prophet, pbuh, was caught in a sort of depression coupled with astonishment and perplexity. Al-Bukhari reported, the divine inspiration paused for a while and the Prophet, pbuh, became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains, and every time he went up the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are, indeed Allah's messenger in truth," whereupon his heart would become quiet and he would calm down and return home. Whenever the period of the coming of the revelation used to become long, he would do as before, but Gabriel would appear again before him and say to him what he had said before. Bukhari 2-340. Once more, Gabriel brings Allah's revelation. Ibn Hajar said that the pause of Allah's revelation for a few days was to relieve the messenger of Allah's pbuh of the fear he experienced and to make him long for the revelation. When the shades of puzzle receded, the flags of truth were raised. The messenger of Allah's pbuh knew for sure that he had become the messenger of the great Lord. He was also certain that what had come to him was no more than 44. Msa Niu, the ambassador of inspiration. His waiting and longing for the coming of the revelation constituted a good reason for his steadfastness and self-possession on the arrival of Allah's inspiration. Al-Bukhari reported on the authority of Heber bin Abdullah that he had heard the messenger of Allah, pbuh, speak about the period of pause as follows: while I was walking, I heard a voice from the sky. I looked up, and surely enough, it was the same angel who had visited me in the cave of Hira. He was sitting on a chair between the earth and the sky. I was very afraid of him and knelt on the ground. I went home saying, cover me, all revealed to me the verses, O you Muhammad, pbuh, enveloped in garments. Arise and warn, and your Lord all magnify, and your garments purify, and keep away from rouge the idols. Al-Quran 74-1-5. After that the revelation started coming strongly, frequently and regularly. Bukhari, the Book of Tafsir, 2733. Some details pertinent to the successive stages of revelation. Before we go into the details of the period of communicating the message and prophethood, we would like to get acquainted with the stages of the revelation, which constituted the main source of the message and the subject matter of the call. Ibn al-Qayyim, mentioning the stages of the revelation, said, the first, the period of true vision. It was the starting point of the revelation to the messenger of Allah, pbuh. The second, what the angel invisibly cast in the prophet's mind and heart. The messenger of Allah, pbuh, said, the noble spirit revealed to me, no soul will perish until it exhausts its due course, so fear Allah, and gently request him, never get so impatient to the verge of disobedience of Allah. What Allah has can never be acquired, but through obedience to him. The third, the angel used to visit the messenger of Allah, pbuh, in the form of a human being and would speak to him directly. This would enable him to fully understand what the angel said. The angel was sometimes seen in this form by the prophet's companions. The fourth, the angel came to him like the toll of a bell, and this was the most difficult form because the angel used to seize him tightly and sweat would stream from his forehead even on the coldest day. If the prophet, pbuh, was on his camel, the camel would not withstand the weight, so it would immediately kneel down on the ground. Once the messenger of Allah, pbuh, had such a revelation when he was sitting and his thigh was on Zayd's. Zayd felt the pressure had almost injured his thigh. 45. Msa Neu. The fifth, the prophet, pbuh, saw the angel in his actual form. The angel would reveal to him what Allah had ordered him to reveal. This, as mentioned in in S. and Najm chapter 53, the star, happened twice. The sixth, what Allah himself revealed to him in heaven, i.e. when he ascended to heaven and received Allah's behest of prayer. The seventh, Allah's words to his messenger, pbuh, at first hand without the mediation of an angel. It was a privilege granted to Moses, and clearly attested in the Quran, as it is attested to our prophet, pbuh, in the Al-Isr, number 146, chapter 17, the journey by night of the noble Quran. Some religious scholars added a controversial eighth stage in which they state that Allah spoke to the prophet, pbuh, directly without a curtain in between. This issue remains however unconfirmed. Zad al-Ma'ad 1/18, proclaiming Allah, the All-High, and the immediate constituents. The first revelation sent to the prophet, pbuh, implied several injunctions, simple in form but highly effective and of serious far-reaching ramifications. The angel communicated to him a manifest message saying, O you Muhammad, pbuh, enveloped in garments. Arise and warn, and your Lord all magnify, and your garments purify, and keep away from rouge the idols, and give not a thing in order to have more, or consider not your deeds of Allah's obedience as a favor to all, and be patient for the sake of your Lord, i.e. perform your duty to all. Quote, Al-Quran 74-17, for convenience and ease of understanding, we are going to segment the message into its immediate constituents. 1. The ultimate objective of warning is to make sure that no one breaching the pleasures of Allah in the whole universe is ignorant of the serious consequences that his behavior entails, and to create a sort of unprecedented shock within his mind and heart. 2. Magnifying the Lord dictates explicitly that the only pride allowed to nourish on the earth is exclusively Allah's, to the exclusion of all the others. 3. Cleansing the garments and shunning all aspects of abomination. Point. directly to the indispensable need to render both the exterior and interior exceptionally chaste and pure, in addition to the prerequisite of sanctifying the soul and establishing it highly immune against the different sorts of impurities and the various kinds of pollutants. Only through this avenue can the soul of the prophet, pbuh, reach an ideal status and become eligible to enjoy the shady mercy of all, and his protection, security, guidance and ever-shining light, and will consequently set the highest example to the human community, attract the sound hearts and inspire awe and reverence in the stray ones in such a manner that all the world, in agreement or disagreement, will head for it and take it as the rock bed in all facets of their welfare. 46. Msa Neu. 4. The prophet, pbuh, must not regard his strife in the way of all as a deed of grace that entitles him to a great reward. On the contrary, he has to exert himself to the utmost, dedicate his whole efforts and be ready to offer all sacrifices in a spirit of self-forgetfulness enveloped by an ever-present awareness of all, without the least sense of pride in his deeds or sacrifices. 5. The last verse of the Qur'an, revealed to the prophet, pbuh, alludes to the hostile attitude of the obdurate disbelievers, who will jeer at him and his followers. They are expected to disparage him and step up their malice to the point of scheming against his life and lives of all the believers around him. In this case he has got to be patient and is supposed to persevere and display the highest degree of stamina for the sole purpose of attaining the pleasure of all. These were the basic preliminaries that the prophet, pbuh, had to observe, very simple injunctions in appearance, greatly fascinating in their calm rhythm, but highly effective in practice. They constituted the trigger that aroused a far-ranging tempest in all the corners of the world. The verses comprise the constituents of the new call and propagation of the new faith. A warning logically implies that there are malpractices with painful consequences to be sustained by the perpetrators, and since the present life is not necessarily the only room to bring people to account for their misdeeds or some of them, then the warning would necessarily imply calling people to account on another day, i.e. the day of resurrection, and this per se suggests the existence of a life other than this one we are living. All the verses of the Noble Qur'an call people to testify explicitly to the oneness of all, to delegate all their affairs to all, the All-High, and to subordinate the desires of the self and the desires of all servants to the attainment of his pleasures. The constituents of the call to Islam could, briefly speaking, go as follows: a testimony to the oneness of all, b. belief in the hereafter, c. sanctifying one's soul and elevating it high above evils and abominations that conduce to terrible consequences. Besides this, there is the dire need for virtues and perfect manners coupled with habituating oneself to righteous deeds. D. Committing one's all affairs to all, the All-High. E. All the foregoing should run as a natural corollary to unwavering belief in Muhammad's message and abidance by his noble leadership and righteous guidance. The verses have been prefaced, in the voice of the Most High, by a heavenly call, mandating the prophet, pbuh, to undertake this daunting responsibility, calling people unto all. The verses meant to extract him forcibly out of his sleep, divest him of his mantle and detach him from the warmth and quiet of life, and then drive him down a new course attended with countless hardships, and requiring a great deal of strife in the way of all. 47. Msa Neu. O you Muhammad, pbuh, enveloped in garments, arise and warn. Al-Quran 74-1-2, suggesting that to live to oneself is quite easy, but it has been decided that you have to shoulder this heavy burden. Consequently, sleep, comfort, or warm bed are items decreed to be alien in your lexicon of life. O Muhammad, arise quickly for the strife and toil awaiting you. No time is there for sleep in such amenities. Grave responsibilities have been divinely determined to fall to your lot, and drive you into the turmoil of life to develop a new sort of precarious affinity with the conscience of people and the reality of life. The Prophet, pbuh, managed quite successfully to rise to his feet and measure up to the new task. He went ahead in a spirit of complete selflessness, relentlessly striving, and never abating in carrying the burden of the great trust, the burden of enlightening mankind, and the heavy weight of the new faith and strife for over 20 years, nothing distracting his attention from the awesome commission. May all reward him, for us and all humanity, the best ending. The following research at hand gives an account in miniature of his long strive and uninterrupted struggle he made after receiving the ministry of messengership. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29-168. 171,182, 48. Phases and stages of the call. MSA Neu. The Muhammadan call could be divided into two phases distinctively demarcated. 1. The Makkan phase, nearly 13 years. 2. The Madanese phase, fully 10 years. Each of the two phases included distinctive features easily discernible through accurate scrutiny into the circumstances that characterized each of them. The Makkan phase can be divided into three stages. 1. The stage of the secret call, 3 years. 2. The stage of the proclamation of the call in Makkah, from the beginning of the 4th year of prophethood to almost the end of the 10th year. 3. The stage of the call to Islam and propagating it beyond Makkah. It lasted from the end of 10th year